Ma'am Rana here. Today, I will be discussing sociological and anthropological perspective of the self. For the learning outcome, students will be able to examine the external forces that influenced or shaped their view of the self through the lens of sociological and anthropological perspective. So these are the subtopics of this lesson for today. First, what is sociology? Second, George Herbert Mead and the social self. Third, what is anthropology? And fourth, the self embedded in the culture. Before I start, I want you to pause for a minute and think about this question. Who were the people that influenced you and your development as a person? Again, who were the people that influenced you and your development as a person? So you can write it down on a piece of paper or you can just pause for a while and reflect. Let's proceed. So before anything else, I will define what sociology means. Sociology is the study of human social relationships and institutions. So the self is socially constructed in the sense that it is shaped through interaction with other people. To better understand ourselves, it is important to look at the external forces that influenced our development as a person. Concept of self in the sociological perspective. So the self, according to traditional sociology, is a reasonably steady set of perceptions about who we are in relation to ourselves, others, and social institutions. So theories of the self attempt to explain how social processes such as socialization influence the development of the self. George Herbert Mead and the social self. George Herbert Mead is an American sociologist and considered as the father of American pragmatism. So Mead rejected the idea of biological determination of the self, which proposes that an individual has an already established self from the moment he or she is born. For Mead, the establishment of the self comes from one's interaction with other people. So the process of developing the self is through our social experiences. The I and the me. So Mead proposes that there are two components of the self, and these are the I and the me. The I is the reaction of the individual to the attitudes of others, as well as the manifestation of the individuality of the person. So as subject, the self is active. Mead called the active side of the self the I. On the other hand, the me are the characteristics, behavior, and actions done by a person that follows the generalized others. The self is also an object as we imagine ourselves as others see us. So Mead called the objective side of the self the me, meaning the concept of the I is one's response to the established attitude and the behavior that the person assumes in reference to their social interactions, while the me are the attitudes and behavior of the person with reference to their social environment. So the I want to do some actions because I want to do it. So you do these actions because you want to do it. I. While the me, you do those actions because you are expected by the society to do those actions. So here you follow the society's norms. Mead's three role-playing stages of self-discipline. So Mead proposed that there are three stages in which a person has to go through for one to develop oneself. So these stages are preparatory stage, play stage, and game stage. First stage is the preparatory stage from birth to 2 years old. During this stage, the infant simply imitates the actions and behaviors of the people that the infant interacts with. The child is only mimicking what he or she observes from his or her environment, meaning they copy the actions with whom they regularly interact with. So the actions and behavior has no meaning behind it because it's just a reflection of what they can remember. The second stage is the play stage from 2 to 6 years old. In this stage, children begin to interact with each other which specific rules apply. So these rules often do not adhere to any set of standards but are set by the children themselves. So this is the stage where the child practices real-life situations and learns self-development through pretend play or role play. So this stage is critical because the child learns to behave in a certain way through role-playing only when they have had similar experiences, such as going to schools and going to the doctor or dentist. Lastly, game stage from 6 to 9 years old. According to Mead, this is the final stage of self-development, characterized by the ability of the children to recognize the rules of the game and be able to identify their roles and the roles of the others that is playing with them. This is also the stage where a child realizes how his or her attitudes and viewpoints can integrate learning from the expectations of society as a whole. So to summarize, society influences your identity or the development of the self. Self as a product of society. Your family members, peers, schools such as teachers and administrators, government policies, culture, traditions, and the society as a whole influenced your identity. So let's proceed to the anthropological perspective of the self. Again, before I begin, I will define what anthropology means. So anthropology studies the human species and its immediate ancestors and systematically explores human biology and cultural diversity. So the study of anthropology is concerned both with the biological features that makes us human, such as physiology, genetic makeup, and evolution, and with the social aspects, such as language, culture, and religion. Concept of self in anthropological perspective. So culture influences the development of the self through enculturation. It guides the way we think, feel, and act. Through this process, we learn to develop unique characteristics as an individual. So there are 4 subfields or subdiscipline in anthropology, and these are cultural anthropology, archaeological anthropology, biological or physical anthropology, and lastly, linguistic anthropology. First subfield is cultural anthropology. So it is the study of human society and culture which describes, analyzes, interprets, and explains social and cultural similarities and differences. So it explores the diversity of the present and the past. There are 2 different activities which can study and interpret cultural diversity, and these are ethnography and ethnology. So ethnography requires fieldwork to collect data, often descriptive and specific to group, whereas ethnology uses data collected by a series of researches, usually synthetic and comparative. Next is the archaeological anthropology. So it reconstructs, describes, and interprets human behavior and cultural patterns through material remains. So these remains are plants, animals, and artifacts. Next, or the third subfield, is biological or physical anthropology. So it focuses on human evolution revealed by fossil, human genetics, human growth and development, and human biological plasticity and the biology. Lastly, linguistic anthropology. So it studies language in its social and cultural context across space and over time. Universal features of language are analyzed, and association between language and culture are evaluated. So the self embedded in the culture. Like what I have said in the concept of self in the anthropological perspective, culture influences the development of the self through enculturation. But what is culture? Culture refers to customary behavior and beliefs that are passed on through enculturation. Enculturation is the social process which culture is learned and transmitted. So, culture is a social process that is learned and passed down from the next generation. So, we Filipinos have specific culture and traditions that we follow. And these culture and tradition were taught to us since we were children. For example, respecting the elders through mano po, saying po at opo, bayanihan, prioritizing the family, and etc. Jurors define culture as a system of inherited conceptions expressed in symbolic forms by means of which men communicate, perpetuate, and develop their knowledge and attitudes towards life. So, the interpretation of the symbols in each culture is essential, which gives meaning to one's action. So, each culture has its own symbols and has its own meaning. So, to summarize the two perspectives, sociocultural factors, both sociological and anthropological perspective of the self, influences the development of the self. So, these include forces such as child rearing practices, discrimination and prejudice, our ethnic and racial identity, gender and norms, family and kinship structures, and lastly, religious beliefs and practices. For the child rearing practices, were you raised in a strict or lax environment? Discrimination, prejudice, Asian hate issue, Black Lives Matter, and others discriminate people according to their race, skin color, class, gender, religion. Our ethnic racial identity, being a Filipino, or for, excuse me, for the ethnic group, you might belong to an indigenous tribe. Family and kinship structure, so every family is unique and has their own family dynamics. Maybe you belong to a nuclear family, extended family, dysfunctional family, or foster family. And lastly, religious beliefs and practices. So every religion has their own set of rules to abide and has their own belief system. So thank you so much for listening to my discussion. I hope you've learned something. So take care always, guys, and God bless.